is really the art and science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello, this is Vikram Prakash, and you are listening to Architecture Talk. Each week we have a conversation with a contemporary thinker on issues of architecture, life, and design thinking. We are interested in what architecture is today, what it has been in the past, and what it might be, what it could be in the future. Today I am talking to two young women architects, Mariam Kamara and Yasaman Esmaili, both of whom formed a partnership when they were still in school here at the University of Washington, along with Professor Elizabeth Golden and architect Bob Hull, to design a school for girls in Afghanistan. A fantastic project on the tails of which they have since graduation gone on to build a fascinating international global practice. And recently they just won a major award, and I begin the conversation by asking them about it.
But I'm looking at this beautiful website of the Lafarge Holcim Foundation, and here it says that the gold prize for the Middle East Africa region went to the two of you.
Yes.
How was it? What was the experience like?
Here's the thing. Essentially, it was almost like being on a reality TV show.
Exactly.
Essentially, there was kind of this build-up tension, which was amazing. I'd never experienced anything like it because, you came in contact with the organizers fairly often. We had to do some interviews, some video recordings and things like that. So there was just the tension was on all the time. And every once in a while, you always hear someone just drop in your ear, well, you never know. What do you think you're going to win? What do you think is going to happen? What do you think? And so they kind of get in your head in a way.
Yeah, they built up like the anticipation in us. They made a big deal out of it, like throughout that process.
Yeah, I mean, by the time we got there, I think personally, I was just hoping, and that was my only wish, was please don't let me cry. And obviously, that's exactly what happened. I was so mad at myself.
But were you excited? Were you happy? What did it feel like to be the gold award winner?
Honestly, personally, I still don't believe it. It's really odd. 2 days ago, I went on the website to check again because I'm thinking maybe.
But what was the actual emotion?
I think the emotion. For me, the main emotion was total disbelief, number one, because even in my wildest dreams, I did not think that would be the prize. I was thinking, okay, at best, maybe we get, a bronze award or something, like the third award, or we get an acknowledgement. And I felt that it was such an honor to be distinguished to begin with, that no matter what we won, it did not matter. But when it kind of dawned on us that we got the top award, I think for me, what was going through my mind, and I think that's kind of what I said in my speech, what was going through my mind was that I could not believe they gave the award for a project like this. And when I say a project like this, what I mean is that it was not a project that was necessarily trying to be, sexy and glamorous with, those sexy architecture images or something like that. It is a project that really concerned itself just purely with people. And the architecture is just at the service of that.
So tell us about the project. What was the project about?
The project is this, secular and religious complex. So you can think of it as a cultural center in this village 7 hours away from Niamey, the capital of Niger in West Africa. And it's a project that came about because there was this old traditional mosque in the area that was supposed to be destroyed to give way to a new concrete made mosque. And so little do we know that traditional mosque had actually been built by this traditional mason really known in the area, who won an Aga Khan Award of Architecture in 1986 for a similar mosque. And so all of a sudden, alarm bells went, and it was just, oh my gosh, please do not destroy this building. But the issue was that it was difficult to sell that, considering that not only was the mosque falling into disrepair, nobody really cared about the building enough to maintain it and keep it going, because it's used as a Friday mosque, so once a week only. And then most importantly, it was just starting to not be big enough as the village is expanding rapidly. So how do you maintain this building, make it something that is used on a daily basis, that will make people care more about it in terms of the service that it provides for the community?
So would you describe this as a preservation, adaptive reuse project?
I think so. I mean,
part of it, yeah.
Yeah. It's an adaptive reuse and an extension, essentially.
I see.
Right? Would you say yes?
Well, I mean, the project has two components. One is the adaptive reuse, an old mosque that is becoming a library, and then there is a new component, which is a completely new building, a new mosque.
Exactly.
So it's both.
You describe it on your website, breathing life into existing old Islamic practices, breathing new life. So, I mean, that's also kind of a renewal preservation concept. Do you want to talk about that? What does that mean, Yasi?
Yes. So I think, like you were asking earlier, how you felt about this gold award, and like, I think what was the most striking for me and very exciting, I think, for both of us, was the fact that this project naturally came to be this space for conversation and communication and exchange of religious and secular thoughts next to each other. And we happened to be part of this thing that happened, and we were just trying to, solve these problems.
Conversation with who?
Well, because, basically you are creating a library, and you're turning a mosque to a library, which is a secular space, and then you have a new mosque next to it. And to your point, going back to the concept of Islam, we talk about Hikmah, which was this center in Baghdad, in Iraq, like different types of Islamic centers, where you would have knowledge and religion together. So people would study knowledge and Islam in the same space. And it is like a traditional model of how the religion used to be and how people used to practice the religion. Science and religion, science and Islam was always together. There was no such separation of religion from secular teaching.
So hikmah is different from a madrasa?
Essentially, what would often happen from what I saw was that you would have the mosque, the madrasa is in the mosque. It depends, again, as he's saying, it depends on the typology and on the region. But typically the madrasa would be kind of attached to the mosque, and then next to it there would be another building, which is usually a library of sort, where you would have scholars who go there, who do research, who expand on research, write research on topics like, you name it, mathematics, philosophy, all of the big, topics of this world. And often you would find the same scholars who were in this, Hikmah, house of knowledge, house of wisdom, is what it means, who are scholars in these centers, also be kind of erudites, of religion and preaching in the mosque at the same time. So the two were not dissociated from each other, as Yasi was saying, and we thought that was unbelievably inspirational of a setup, and wish to bring that back in this day and age when you have such tension. And that's not only with Islam, but with all religions. There's somewhat of a tension between religious knowledge or religious teachings and more secular, universal, scientific knowledge.
I mean, that seems to me possibly, absolutely incredible dimension of both of you as practicing architects and the work that you're doing that this project, let's continue talking about the Hikma project here in Niamey, outside Niamey. Do you see this? How do you see this as a statement, as a kind of a political statement in the contemporary world? What do you see as an architectural contribution to the kind of politicization that we are surrounded by, particularly around Islam?
I think one of the aspects of the project is to help to de-dramatize the context, actually. It feels that the political and religious context we live in all over the world is just kind of artificially dramatic, pinning up, these different aspects of life, like I said, whether it's the religious aspect of one's life versus the more scientific or knowledge-based or secular-based, as though one could not exist without the other. And to me, that always felt fairly artificial. It serves, certain purposes, certain political purposes and political goals, unfortunately. And it's often manipulated to serve those goals. And I think for this project, what the hope is, and I believe that that's what would happen just automatically by the proximity of these two bodies, I guess, these two spaces, is that their proximity, which is just, let's say, 50 meters or something like that from each other, automatically makes it that those two aspects now can talk to each other. People who are going to the library or, and by the way, the library also serves as a literacy center for adults, as a workshop spaces for women who want to learn new skills and things of that nature. That space will always be filled with people who would then, when it's time for prayer, would just, walk on over 50 meters over to pray and then come back again. And so there's just automatic dialogue that's kind of effortless. You don't even have to do anything. You don't have to preach. You don't have to say anything. Just the proximity of these two spaces and the use of a previously religious space as a secular space helps to really make the whole thing a non-issue.
Right. I mean, I think it's very interesting, the phrase that you use, proximity.
Right.
Proximity is a condition which is neither identical nor opposed and totally different.
Exactly.
And it is within the tools of design and architecture to think about that, because we are creating a spaces, and spaces are for people. People will be present in those spaces. So we can really think about how that proximity and exposure of people to each other is affecting their life and
allows them to sort of be in a state where they are not asked to take choices.
Exactly.
Exactly.
You don't have to choose between one and the other. Yeah.
I second what Mariam said, is that what the problem that we have, which is causing all this, international situations that we are facing now, is lack of communication. And it's because people don't see each other and they're kind of locked in this one way of seeing things. So the more you can create these bridges and this very easy ways that people can get exposure to each other, and science can be exposed to religion to science, the more we will solve that problem, because it will bring the ease into these tensions.
Right, and allow these discourses and people to live with each other.
Coexist.
To coexist without becoming the same or being, it's a way to deconstruct or undermine the opposition between in and out and with me and against me. It's like we can just be proximate, which doesn't mean we agree with everything.
Yep.
Which doesn't mean we have to disagree about
We don't have to
either.
be identical, but we can be together, basically.
But you have translated Hikma as a mind's garden in your website. Do you want to talk about why do you say a mind's garden?
It really goes back to what you were saying just a minute ago about this idea of both proximity, but also this idea of cultivating something, right, in kind of this passive way, almost in a way that, you know, you can plant seeds and just, you know, when the rainy season comes, you know, or something like that, you know, it kind of takes care of itself and it grows and it nurtures you and it feeds you. So in a way, you know, I guess metaphorically, it can also be seen as that. You know, we planted these seeds that will be watered through these different activities that these spaces provide. And hopefully it's setting up a fertile environment, I guess, for all these new ideas and new ways of looking at things, new ways of looking at life, new ways for education. Because let's not forget that the project is not necessarily first and foremost about religion or about necessarily this proximity. We kind of went with that, but ultimately it's about empowering a community by providing, you know, access to books, where, you know, you have students who just have a couple, school books that they have access to, but that's about it. They've never read a novel. They've never read, you know, all of those different things that we take for granted. And so it was about also opening up, you know, the minds of people in a village that's very remote, and all of a sudden, you know, giving them a link to an outside world. So all of those can kind of work together.
Yeah. So it's about bringing the world to this village outside Niamey,
yes,
as much as bringing the village and its history to the world.
Exactly.
So the Mind's Garden is kind of your invention. That's not what Hikmah means.
No, Hikmah means wisdom.
Yes.
Wisdom.
Yes.
And Mind's Garden is a kind of a wisdom, yes.
Yes.
It's kind of like we want to cultivate our minds. So I will call like these kind of talks are also something that would be like we are cultivating our minds, and it's like towards a mind's garden. So I think what we were thinking is that if you have this free space for conversation and for communication, then it's like you let your mind to grow and to see, as Mariam was saying. It's like you have access to free food or free, you know, irrigation and different seeds that you need for your mind to grow and to see.
All right, I'll think of renaming to a
Mind's
Garden.
Yes.
Mind's Garden. I like that. But staying on the idea of terms, I think, Mariam, you have this Fada.
Fada, yes. Oh, you remember?
Of course, I remember Fada, and I see you have it outside this housing project. Yeah, that you have identified the entrance as the Fada, the gathering place. Why are you calling it a Fada rather than an entrance?
Because that's what it is.
What is that? What do you mean?
Meaning that the entrance is, I guess, in local architecture, or kind of the vernacular way of conceiving space, there are different stages to how you approach one's home, right? And so the front of the house is kind of this public space almost, where you can, you know, receive people. It's part of the house in a way. You receive people, and it's a place for, you know, exchanging, you know, casually, or even lingering for multiple hours, drinking tea, etc. It's as important as the inside of your house, actually. But it's something, it's a part of architecture that has kind of vanished throughout the years after colonization and changes in typology of homes. Those spaces are not built into the architecture anymore, and rather people still just add to the homes that they built. So along the compound wall, the fada still happens in that people just bring out chairs from inside of the house and lay them in front of their home and sit around. So the practice happens, but the architecture does not provide space necessarily for it. And so this project, which I worked on with Yassi as well, and with Elizabeth Golden and with Philip Schrader as part of the collective that we followed, United for Design, was bringing back this notion and saying, no, this is still the way we live life. Therefore, the architecture should honor that. And thinking of the architecture of the homes as adapted to the people rather than the other way around, which is kind of how it goes now, I guess, certainly in Africa.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, what I hear you saying is that this space outside the house, which is, you know, if one looks at architecture in a limited way as the as what finishes at the end of the wall is not really the street as in public space, but is sort of a semi-public space, which is to say a semi-private space. And these are sort of newer kind of urban concepts, which are not newer. I mean, of course, Mariam, you're from Niger,
Yes.
but Yasi, you're from Tehran, from Iran. Do you have fathers did you have fathers growing up in Iran? Did that concept apply?
Well, for sure. I mean, like in a country like Iran, you find both like very Western type of housings and architecture, but there's also the traditional, which has been there for a long time. And yes, in the traditional way of design, entries are like, there are two main aspects. One is the gathering for mainly like for men or for guests or like people who are just hanging out. And then there's a level of privacy, which is actually what Niamey 2000 also included. So it's like once you enter the house, there is also a transitional zone that has privacy and kind of creates this ward between the private interior of the house and the external, the external ward. So it's kind of like 4 stages. There is the external wall, there is like the transitional conversation zone, there is the privacy zone, and then there is the interior zone, which is very similar in Iran as well.
At the threshold, at the main entrance of the traditional home, outside that, there is also a similar space which can be considered to be...
Not exactly. I mean, it's not exactly something that's called feda, but I think in the way that the houses are laid out in the traditional fabrics of the cities, there is always like, you see like these areas that turn to a bench, and there's a lot of conversation and things that happen between the neighbors. So there are these areas that are created within the alleys where like neighbors would talk to each other. And there's like staging that happens from the public street all the way to the house. There's like so many layers in between. So it's kind of like your residential alley is kind of a private zone of all the houses that are placed there, and they're hanging out in different spots within that area. So yeah, I mean, I see that similarity.
What occurs to me, and forgive me if this is sort of a stupid stereotype, but is there a sort of a gender division or a gradation across this cross-section? When you describe these 5 spaces, in my head, from my experience growing up in India, it would translate into some kind of a gender division with the more male outside and the female inside. Does that make sense?
In Iran it does. I don't think it's the same I don't think everything is the same. I don't think it's the same in Niger, and Mariam can talk about that. But in Iran, it doesn't mean that female can't hang out outside, but for sure the privacy part that you create, which kind of creates the ward of the house, interior part of the house, and separates it from outside, that's more for giving privacy to women.
Mariam, what do you think?
I mean, in Niger, the fada is a very complicated concept, actually. It's evolved to be a space of gathering for many reasons. It is absolutely separated by gender, unfortunately. Fadas are almost always exclusively a male, space, unless there are, let's say, kind of older brothers in the house, and, let's say, like, everybody's a teenager, there are girls, there are boys, and the girls might hang out a little bit with their brothers in the fada, but they will not spend untold number of hours like the boys would, because essentially in a fada, the thing that would happen was that the boys get to stay outside sometimes until the wee hours. And it looks bad for a woman's reputation, I guess, to be out there for so long and playing cards and things of that nature. So there's that unfortunate aspect of it. But on the other end, removing the gender aspect from this construct, it's an unbelievably powerful public space for discourse. Essentially, the fadas have evolved to become these political spaces where they are organized. Some of them even have names. It's like a group or something, or that you join. In the neighborhood, there would be one house, for example, where the fada meets. I have cousins and friends who always tell me, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to my fada."
Yeah, and we call it adda in India. Adda.
Ah, there you go. Okay. Yeah, so it's the same concept. It's like their fada is not necessarily in front of their house. There's one among the group who's front of the house for whatever reason has been elected. Maybe it has a better tree. I don't know. Has been elected to be
Trees are good.
the main fada. Trees are good. Trees are vital. And that's where the fada is, and it's kind of this space where you can meet your friends and talk politics, especially politics, actually. Political parties use fadas a lot for different political events now. I mean, it's kind of this 21st century urban language in my mind that could actually be exploited in many ways, even in terms of urban design and architecture, to see how far it can go.
Well, that would be a good time to take a break. We are talking to Yasaman Esmaili and Mariam Kamara. We'll be right back. And we're back. We're talking to Mariam Kamara and Yasaman Esmaili.
Since we are talking about public space and public discourse and women's reputations, both of you are from, whatever we say, the non-West. Both of you are from the global South. I don't like that term.
Yeah, I don't know. None of them are good.
Both of you are women. Both of you come from Islamic background, and you're not classically white in the Nordic European sense. Last time, yeah.
Classically or unclassically.
And here you are in the public space, in the grand stages of international architectural discourse, doing work and winning prizes. What is the flag that you're flying? What are you trying to do? I mean, you besides being successful and rich and famous.
I'm pretty sure rich is not part of that list.
I mean, I cannot not think that there's a sort of a political project that you're doing. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think I would definitely agree that it's an incredibly political project. And it's so powerful politically that we don't even have to talk about the fact that it's a political project in a way. We'll just kind of quietly let it do its work, I guess. I guess to answer your question about being women on this stage, I think we've had similar conversations, and this question has been raised a couple of times, even at the time of the award. And I think for both of us, but I'll speak for myself, the gender aspect is something that we don't necessarily find relevant in the work or as we work necessarily.
So it's not feminist work?
It's not, no, because, I mean, it depends what you mean by feminist work, I would say. I think we're interested in good projects, in solving real problems, whether they're women-centered or if it's a religious problem or if it's a socio-economic problem, if it's a social justice issue. All of that, I think it's more about empathy than it is necessarily about being a woman and just really trying to solve real problems to real life without necessarily, throwing yourself in this particular category. And the reason I say that it's because I find it sometimes limiting to think about it or to think about myself as, you know, a woman in this architectural world necessarily. It's not necessarily something that I think about, and in a way, it makes it easier. Because I think often as women, when we get into our own heads about, oh yeah, I'm a woman and there's, you know, all these men, you know, and things like that, it's kind of self-defeating in a way. And thankfully, I think both of us are pretty good at being totally oblivious to our gender. Like, I mean, you have no idea how oblivious we are.
But you are saying you're not oblivious to being from the global south and women of color.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think that is actually more important to identity than the fact that we're women. Mm-hmm. I'll let Yassi answer the rest.
Well, I totally second that, like just what Mariam said. I think the being women aspect, it's like, yeah, we are women and we can't change that, and there's nothing wrong or good or bad about it. It's just we happen to be women, but we are architects, and not that there is no gender problems out there, but I think the way we try to work is to really not think about that and to just like work and do the right thing that we believe we should do. And it doesn't, you know, it's not something that, oh, okay, I am a woman, how should I solve this problem, you know?
So you don't think you're letting the women's movement down in the days of Harvey Weinstein?
On the contrary, actually.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, no, and I personally agree that there is gender problems and there are gender inequality in the practice of architecture, but I don't think the way to address it is to to try to kind of like be so desperate or think about it as, oh, I'm a woman, what can I do? You know, it's more about, okay, just do the work and find the right way to do things. As a woman, it's as a woman means that I am a woman, you know, whatever I do is as a woman. So basically by not thinking about that problem and just like doing the work, we are part of that movement, because the movement is about being out there and being an architect,
right?
You know.
Okay, what about the other levels of being women of color or from the global south, from the Islamic world? Are you carrying those flags, or you don't worry about those either?
Well, for me, I will talk about my take on that. It's that, again, there is something about me that is part of me, and that's that I am from Iran. And now I happen to be in the US and I came to study here and I'm working here. And I have seen the problems that are happening in the world that are because of lack of communication. There is this, you know, things that are happening that because I have this background, I might be able to focus on those problems. And again, I don't think about how people are gonna name me or categorize me. That's not what really concerns me. It's again just to focus on solving the problems that are so important for me in the world. And because I happen to be from Iran, you know, I see those problems in an international setting.
I mean, I look at your work, both of you, and I see how you title your works and the firms that you have made called Masomi and Chahar, and we'll talk about what those mean in a moment. It seems to me that a kind of verification and billboarding of the fact that you speak for other cultures and other ways of thinking is important.
For me, I think that's kind of where the variety comes in. So to go back to the question about the gender issue real quick, I think that we are actually, by, you know, being seemingly oblivious to our gender as we're navigating this mostly, you know, male environment, we are actually helping the movement in a way. Because I feel like the movement is not necessarily about screaming on top of your lungs and saying, I'm a victim. It's about saying, it does not matter what you do, I will still make this work. I will still make it happen. And I think by inhabiting the world without being obsessed about our gender is what I found to be the absolute most effective way of really being in any kind of environment, where you're at a disadvantage. So as you said, we're women of color, we're women, period, but we're also of color. And depending on where you find yourself, one or the other aspects of, who you are might be more of a detriment. If I think about the United States, for example, being a woman for me is not necessarily the biggest handicap. Being black is a bigger handicap here than it is being a woman. So all of those things, are just these surface aspects, that shouldn't enter in the way you view yourself or carry yourself as you're working. Now, to speak to being from these non-Western spaces, I think for me, that is probably the thing that is the biggest aspect of my identity, but mostly because having lived in the U.S. for so long, when I went to architecture school as a second career, it was at a time of my life where I was much more aware of the kinds of problems that happen in my part of the world, or my original part of the world, and that I could start seeing ways in which design could actually impact those problems. The thing is, in Western countries, it feels as though design doesn't have as much to do, in a way. A lot of problems have been solved. A lot of, things have been kind of cleared away. Other problems have been created through design as well that, need to be addressed. But I would say that I was viewing the part of the world that I'm from as being one that was in dire need of the kind of work that we do. And so automatically, then you don't have a choice but to address that in that way. And that's why for me, it was just kind of this calculated decision to put all of my effort there as an architect who is trying to be useful through her craft.
Tell me a little bit about what does Masomi and Chahar mean? What do these words mean, and why have you picked them?
I picked the name Masomi because I arrived in Niger kind of working on our first project and feeling very alone, meaning that I was feeling as though I was speaking about all these different problems and all the different ways that architecture could address them, and I couldn't find sounding boards. It was kind of difficult because in that context in Niger, most architects or clients or, just most people in general were more focused on trying to figure out, well, how can we make architecture or make our environment that will make us look more like a Western country. And so I kind of, descended on the place with the exact opposite proposition. And I was thinking about the fact that really what I'm trying to do is begin something all over again, something new. It kind of turn the back on the status quo of that kind of takes it for granted that everything that we have in terms of building standards, in terms of building techniques, in terms of building typologies, are these Western typologies or standards or techniques that we were all taught, and that is kind of a universal truth of some sort. And obviously, I don't believe that to be the case. And so Masomi means the inception. So it's kind of like, yes. So it's about, so in a way, it's about starting something. And that's how I view my work, as kind of, I'm trying to find a new place to start.
In what language is that, Masomi?
It's in Hausa, yeah, which is the majority language in Niamey, in Niger.
How many languages do you speak, Mariam?
It depends on the day, like 5. It depends, like 5 and change.
5 and change?
5.5 or something, I don't know.
And can you easily translate between those languages?
No, actually, because I can't even translate between English and I would say that I have 3 or 4 strongest languages, and I cannot translate between them because depending on the language, and you know this as a person who speaks more than one language, there's just certain concepts that don't translate,
right.
as you say it. So when I speak with my family, for example, my brother, who also is fluent in English, we always speak 3 languages at the same time. Depending on which language translates what we're trying to say most, and it's like perfectly fluent other language that we've set up, which is English, French, and Hausa, and it's just melts together, and we speak it fluently.
What about you, Yasi? So can you tell us about Chahar and how many languages you speak?
Okay. Well, I speak like 3.5, but I also think they don't translate easily. So just what you just said about languages, I completely agree about. But about Chahar, so Chahar means 4 basically in Farsi.
We say char in Hindi, so it means 4, yes.
It's used in many different languages probably. And it's used in many of the architectural terminology of like traditional Persian architecture and urban spaces like Chahar Su, which is the central space of a bazaar where all the trades meet, or Chahar Rah, which is where the roads meet, or Chahar Ayvani, which is the main element of Persian architecture. And the reason that it's named like that is that in each spot, whatever you are building or designing or whatever space you are creating, there are many different directions that are influencing that space and that element. And all of those directions matter, whether it's north, south, east, west, whether it's, different powers, different elements that are influencing that problem. You have to consider all of those elements at the same time. And the reason that I picked this name is because I think design is a tool for problem solving in a way that you can study many different problems all at the same time and go to solve a problem without making any assumptions that one aspect is more important than the other aspect. And it's kind of this zone that there should be a trade between different ways of thinking, different ways of seeing the world, and being an international person, growing up in Iran, learning now about the so-called Western world, and how things are seen from Western world, how the Eastern or non-Western world is seen, and vice versa. I feel this urge. So I see that there is such an opportunity for seeing design as a tool that can let us actually influence this world of problems by kind of being open to all different being open to solving a problem by considering different aspects.
At the crossroads of culture and civilization, or the 4 roads. So, being multilingual, multicultural, at the crossroads myself, I'm totally simpatico to the discussion and what you're saying. And yet at the same time, in my own life, I've often felt that in spite of all those crossroads and the things we begin and want to stand for, there is the inevitable mediating presence, let's say, of English and the West. And let me sort of try and talk about that more specifically in architectural terms, as in terms of, let's say, the international aesthetic language of modernism, sort of clean lines, punched openings, a kind of a way of looking at architecture that we all teach and learn here in the West. So I'm inviting you to talk a little bit about the aesthetics of your work, which are just beautiful, just gorgeous.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Where would you locate the visual vocabulary of your work? Let's take the housing.
Dynamic 2000. I mean, that one is totally located in the place, I would say, Because it's very interesting, actually. I love that you asked this question, because I was talking about the housing project with a fellow architect over here at RISD, and his first comment about the project was, "Oh yeah, I love this project. It has this Bauhaus, feel to it, which is great." And I was completely shocked by that assessment. But at the same time, when I looked at it, I was like, "Oh, okay, I see why he said that." However, I think that one of the problems is that we have accepted that kind of architecture was actually invented by the modernists. That's already one aspect. Mm-hmm. When we look back, 200, 300, 400 years ago, what we did in Niamey 2000 already existed. It's completely,
was modernist.
I actually started wondering, because I was going through, some Louis Kahn projects, and Mies and all that. And I started thinking, okay, you know what? I think actually the original modernists were in West Africa or in the Middle East, because that is exactly how we did architecture.
Right.
It was, these square structures, and those houses still exist today. We're lucky that we have a couple of cities in Niger that still have these old homes that are 300 years old, or something like that, that are still inhabited, and you can see the same expression. I think the difference between the architecture, the shape is very similar, but the differences are, for example, in the openings, where, there will be really larger openings or something like that in the modernist building. But in the traditional architecture that you would see in Niger, it would be similar, except they would be very, very small, if any, openings because of the climate. And so essentially our architecture, I think, what we were thinking about for that project, and what I think about in all of the other projects that I worked on, I don't necessarily look at precedents, as in Western precedents or something like that, in the way that often we're taught to look at. The only thing that concerns me is what materials do I have at my disposal? What is the climate like? How do things get protected? And it's just kind of basic building at the end of the day. And then the aesthetic follows in a way.
That's a very modernist way of looking at things.
Yeah, but that's actually how we traditionally build. It's just the basics, and the aesthetic follows, and the aesthetic always has a utility, like a functional utility. So if you have a screen, and I'm sure it's the same in Iran, or in just hotter, climates or desert climates, which is the case in Niger. Screens, protect you from the harsh sun, but also allow for ventilation and things of that nature. That will always be true, right? If you have smaller openings on the outside, and less glazing, that will, attract less heat. Or if you're in a cold climate, then more glazing, and southern exposure or something like that helps you heat up the interior. Those are basic ways, and I think that's basically what architecture used to be about.
Form follows function. Form doesn't follow fashion, then, huh?
I hope it doesn't follow fashion, because I think architecture is a bit more critical to life, I would say, even though I would agree that fashion is pretty critical, but architecture needs to be absolutely beautiful, but it needs to work. It needs to work. It cannot be just about what we're looking at.
Well, I will look forward to seeing what the both of you do. It was such a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you for being on Architecture Talk.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure for us.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. I'm Vikram Prakash, and our show's producer is Sadie Vechler. See you next time.